People always want to know what goes on behind the face. They look at a man like me on the day they remember now, the one with the cameras, and they decide that the stillness must be empty, that there cannot be much of a man left under that much discipline. I have heard it said kindly, and I have heard it said as an insult, and I have learned that the kind version stings worse. So let me tell you what was going on behind my face on Founding Day, while a famous man tried to make a fool of me in front of 40,000 people and several million more who were not even there. I was thinking about a horse. My name is Tom Adair. For 10 years I have stood the causeway gate at Caldmere Palace, in the kingdom of Liran, which is a small place and an old one, and which takes its founding the way other countries take a war they won. On the first morning of the last week of summer, the whole capital comes out for the procession. The carriages roll down the King's Causeway from the palace forecourt, the bands go before them, the mounted squadron rides escort, and the people stand 10 and 12 deep behind the rope lines and the low iron rail and cheer until they are hoarse. It is the one day of the year when the city looks at the men who guard it and decides, all over again, that we are worth keeping. I have always loved it, though I would never have told a soul. A man in my coat does not say what he loves. He stands where he is put, and lets the loving be a private thing. I should tell you what I was before I was a statue, because it matters to the rest of it. Before the causeway gate I rode with the Grey Riders, the mounted regiment, 8 years of my younger life spent with my legs around a horse, and the smell of a stable in my clothes no matter how I scrubbed. I came up under an old riding master named Coyle, who used to say that a horse is only ever telling you the truth, and that the trouble with men is they have to be taught to do the same. I learned to read an animal before I learned to read a man, and I never lost it. You can take the trooper off the horse. You cannot take the knowing out of his hands. Even 10 years later, planted at a palace gate in a bearskin and white gloves, I could not stand within sound of a squadron forming up without half of me riding with them. So that was the man inside the coat that morning, a horseman in a footman's clothes, standing where the cavalry would pass. The day began the way every founding day begins, with the heat coming up off the cobbles before the sun was properly over the east wing. By 8 o'clock the crowd was already a wall. By 9 the air had that thick, sweet, trodden smell a great mass of people makes, candy and sweat and crushed grass and the oil they use on the cobbles. I stood my post at the inner end of the causeway, where the public route narrows to pass through the causeway gate into the parade court, with the low iron rail an arm's length in front of me and the people pressed up against it on the far side. My orders that day were the plain ones. Hold the gate. Do not be moved. Let the procession through when it comes and not a soul besides. I want you to understand the geometry of it, because the geometry is the whole story. Behind me lay the parade court, a great open square of pale stone where the carriages would gather and the squadron would wheel and form before the ride out. To my left, the causeway ran down toward the city, lined on both sides with the crowd. To my right, through the court and out of sight of the people, the squadron was mustering at the court's far end, 16 horses and their riders dressing into their ranks, with the band beyond them. And I stood at the pinch, the narrow place, the gate, with the rail and the people on one hand and the open court and the horses on the other. A man at a gate is a hinge. Everything that goes wrong in a crowd goes wrong at the hinge. They drill that into you and you nod, and you do not really feel it until the one day you do. The famous man arrived at 9:30. I did not know his name then, and I am not sure I have it right even now, because in the month since I have heard it said 3 different ways, and I have made a small private point of not learning which is correct. He was a film actor, an international one, the sort whose face you have seen on the side of a bus whether you wanted to or not. He played a soldier in a string of pictures that did very well, a hard-jawed commando who killed a great many people between breakfast and lunch and never seemed to muss his hair. He had been invited to the founding as a guest of honor, which is a thing the palace does now, and which I have my opinions about and keep them. He came down the inside of the court with a little weather system of people around him. A publicist with a clipboard and a soft, worried face. A pair of large men in dark suits who were paid to look as though they could fight and plainly never had. And a young woman, his assistant, with a tablet held to her chest like a shield. And an expression I came to understand very well before the day was out. And he had a camera. Of course he had a camera. One of his men carried it, a little black thing on a handle that steadied itself, and it floated along beside the actor at the height of his face, drinking him in. He talked to it the whole way down the court, a low confiding stream of words I could not hear, the way a man talks who has never in his life finished a sentence into silence. I watched him come the way I watch everything, which is to say without appearing to watch anything. My eyes were forward. My chin was level. The bearskin sat on my head like a sleeping animal, and the sweat ran down inside my collar in a thin, steady line, and I did not move to wipe it because a man does not. And because if you let yourself wipe the sweat, you will let yourself do 100 other things. And the whole point of the discipline is that there is no first thing. You hold all of it, or you hold none of it. He stopped in front of me. I knew he would. You learn to feel it coming, the way the crowd's noise changes pitch, the way the cameras turn. There is a kind of man for whom a still figure is not a man at all but an invitation, a blank wall asking to be written on, and he was that kind, and the gate had drawn him the way the gate draws all of them. He planted himself just on the public side of the rail, an arm's length off, and he looked at me with his head tilted, and he smiled the smile that had sold a great many cinema tickets, and behind him the little black camera swung around and found my face and held it. Now this, he said to the camera and to the crowd and to me in that order of importance, is the famous Causeway Guard. They stand here all day. They don't move. They don't talk. They don't blink. He leaned in over the rail. Look at him. Is he even real? A ripple went through the people nearest, half a laugh. I held my post. There is nothing else to tell about that first minute, and there is everything to tell. I held my post. My eyes were forward over his shoulder and past it to the middle distance where I keep them, the place where the causeway meets the sky. I could see him perfectly well at the bottom of my vision, the way you can see your own nose if you let yourself, the famous jaw and the famous smile and the little camera hovering. But I gave him nothing, because nothing was what my orders and my regiment and the whole long line of men who had stood that gate before me required. You may think that is easy. It is the hardest thing I do, and I have done some hard things. To stand and be made small in front of a laughing crowd, to be discussed like a waxwork by a man who has never in his life had to hold anything he did not want to hold, and to give him not one flicker, that takes more out of a man than a march in armor. The body wants to answer. Every animal in you wants to answer. You learn to put a hand on that animal and keep it down, and you do it not for 1 minute but for an hour, and you do it without it costing you anything that shows, and that is the trade. That is what the coat is for. The coat is a promise that the man inside it has already won the fight you are watching him not have. He did not get his flinch, and a man like that cannot abide not getting his flinch. So he escalated the way they do. He started by talking about me as though I could not hear. He told the camera that he had played soldiers his whole career, real soldiers, that he had done his own stunts in pictures where men like me would have called for a stretcher, and that he had always wondered whether the men who stood these gates could do the things he did or whether they only knew how to stand. He said it pleasantly. That is the part people forget when they tell it now. He was not snarling. He was charming. He had a charm that had been polished on 10,000 strangers, and he turned it on me like a lamp, and waited for me to warm to it. And when I did not, he turned it brighter. He took off his sunglasses and tried to catch my eye. He waved a hand slowly across my line of sight, close enough that I felt the small wind of it, and told the crowd I had not so much as twitched. He clapped twice, sharp, by my ear, the way you would to wake a sleeping dog, and I did not wake because I was not asleep. I was working, and the work was harder than anything he had ever done in front of a green screen with a man holding a fan on him. Behind me, through the open gate, I could hear the squadron settling into its ranks in the court. I knew those sounds the way you know the sounds of your own house at night. The double knock of a hoof set down and shifted, the blow and snort of a horse clearing its nose, the creak of leather as a rider eased his weight, the low single word a corporal of horse uses to bring a fidgeting animal back to order. Under the crowd and under the famous man's patter, I was listening to all of it, and somewhere in the third or fourth minute of his performance, I heard a thing I did not like. There was a young horse in the squadron that year. I knew about him because the stable talk reaches the gate the way all talk reaches a gate, and because a horseman cannot not know. A 4-year-old gray, green to the work, brought into the rear file to be steadied by the old hands around him. He was a good animal by every account, brave and willing, with the only fault that is no fault at all in a young horse, which is that he was young. He had never stood a founding day. He had never had 40,000 people make their wall of noise at him, or a band strike up a brass march 20 feet off his quarters, or the great flat clap that a crowd lets go when the first carriage shows. And I could hear him, under everything, beginning not to like the day. It is a particular sound, and it lives in the chest more than the ear. A small stamp that is not the ordinary shifting of weight, a snort with a question in it, the chink of a bit worried at. A young horse asking his older neighbors again and again, "Are we all right? Are we all right?" And the older horses answering with their stillness, "We are all right. We are all right," until the moment, if it comes, when the question is asked one too many times and an old horse, tired and hot and pressed in the rank, fails to answer. I marked it. There was nothing I could do with it. I was a man at a gate with his eyes forward and a famous fool an arm's length off, and the squadron was the responsibility of the men in the court, good men, who could surely hear what I heard. But I marked it, and I felt the old trooper in me come awake and stand at the front of all the rest of me, and I think that is the thing I am proudest of in the whole business, though no camera caught it and no one could ever have seen it. While the famous man worked to make me into nothing, I was quietly becoming the most useful thing in that square, and not one person there knew, least of all him. He came back to the rail. He had decided, I think, on a plan. "All right," he said, and now there was an edge under the charm, the edge of a man whose charm has not been paid for. "Let's see what it takes." He looked along the rail at the crowd and lifted his voice and brought them in, because that is the other thing men like him know how to do, to make the crowd a partner in the thing so that it is no longer one man being cruel but a whole field of people having fun, which is a different thing to be on the wrong side of. "Should we see if he's alive?" he said, and the crowd, God help them, because a crowd is a young horse too, said yes. What followed I will set down plainly, because the plain telling is the true one, and because the versions that have gone around have made me out a saint and him a monster, and he was neither and I am certainly not. He reached over the rail and he flicked the chin strap of my bearskin with one finger, a small thing, a child's thing. Then he plucked at the cuff of my white glove, where it shows below the red of the sleeve. Then he stood square in front of me with his face a hand's breadth from mine, closer than any man should stand to another, and he held his own eyes wide and unblinking, and stared into mine to see if he could outlast me, while his camera swam in close over his shoulder to catch the moment I cracked. I did not crack. I will not pretend it was nothing. A man's face that close in front of a laughing crowd, with the heat coming up and the sweat in your eyes and the whole day pressing on you, there is a roaring that starts up in a man at a time like that, an old animal roaring that says move, that says answer, that says you are a man and not a post and you will not be handled. I held the animal down. I held it the way you hold a frightened horse, not by force but by being a stiller and a surer thing than the fear, by being so completely unmoved that the fear has nothing to push against and at last lies down. I have done it with horses 100 times. I did it that day with myself. I stood and I gave him my eyes forward and my chin level and the long middle distance over his shoulder, And after a while, because there is nothing on earth so awkward as a man who has run out of things to do to a wall, he stepped back. The crowd cheered him for it. That is true, and I will not soften it. They cheered because he had performed, and because performing is the thing they had come to see, and because they did not understand yet what they were looking at. They thought they were watching a man tease a statue. They did not know they were watching a man insult the one person in that square who was, at that moment, paying attention. He took a small bow. He said something to the camera about how some things in this old country never change, and how he supposed that was the charm of it. And his voice when he said charm had a curl in it that took the word and made it into something it should not have been. Then he turned half away, satisfied, already losing interest, a man who has finished his bit and is wondering about lunch. And in the court behind me, the young gray asked his question one time too many, and the day went sideways. I heard it before I saw it, because I always hear it before I see it, and because my back was to it and there was nothing to see. I heard the band strike the opening bars of the founding march, the great brass blare of it that I have heard 40 times, and that a 4-year-old gray had heard never. I heard, under the brass, the young horse's snort go up half an octave into the sound a horse makes when the question has become a statement. I heard a corporal's voice, sharp now, no longer steadying, and I heard the particular ugly clatter of shod hooves losing their rhythm, the offbeat scramble of an animal that has stopped going where it is sent and started going where it is afraid. And I heard the thing every horseman dreads, which is the sound of that fear jumping from one animal to the next like a spark down a fuse, a snort answered by a snort, a stamp answered by a plunge, the rank shivering and bunching and beginning all at once to come apart. The squadron broke. I have tried since to put the next part in order, and the truth is that it did not happen in an order. It happened all at once, the way the worst things do, and I will have to lay it out in a line only because words come in a line and the morning did not. But I want you to hold in your mind, under everything I am about to tell you, that this is the moment the famous man had spent 20 minutes daring me to provoke. He had wanted to see if the statue could move. The statue had been waiting the whole time for exactly this, and had known the whole time that it would come. I turned my head, just my head, the body still squared to the gate, the way you are taught, because the gate was still mine until I gave it up for a better reason, and there was about to be a better reason. I turned my head and I looked back through the open gate into the parade court, and I saw the squadron coming apart at the far end, the neat ranks bursting like a seam, riders hauling on reins, horses rearing and wheeling, and out of the boil of it, already ahead of the rest, the young gray bolting. Not toward the open. Horses do not run toward the open when they are mad with fear. They run toward the thing that looks like a way out, and to a young horse who has come into this court only through one gate, the way out was the gate. My gate. The pinch. The hinge. The narrow place with the iron rail and the crowd packed 10 deep behind it. He was coming straight at me, and the people, and the rail, with 2 more horses already breaking after him. I want to tell you what I did not do, because the not doing is half the discipline. I did not freeze. I did not shout. I did not run, though every common animal in me, the same one that had wanted to answer the famous man, wanted now with a far older and far better reason to be somewhere that was not the path of a bolting horse. I had perhaps 3 seconds, and I have learned that 3 seconds is a great deal of time if you have spent 10 years making sure you will not waste the first 2 of it deciding to act. A bolting horse is not a wall of muscle that cannot be turned. That is what frightened people believe, and their belief is what gets them hurt, because a frightened person plants himself like a wall and a horse will go through a wall or over it. A horse is a coward, a brave and beautiful coward, and a horse that is running from fear is looking, the whole time it runs, for permission to stop. It does not want to run into the dark mass of a crowd any more than you want to run into a wall. It runs because no one has given it another answer. The trooper's job, the only job, is to be the other answer. To be, in the half-second the animal goes past, a thing so calm and so certain and so plainly in charge that the horse's terror reaches for it the way a falling man reaches for a hand. You cannot do that from the side, and you cannot do that by hiding. You have to put yourself where the horse can see you, in its path but not square in it, near the shoulder where its eye can find you. And you have to be there with your whole body saying the one thing the day had stopped saying. We are all right. And you have to do it knowing that if you have read it wrong, or if the horse is too far gone, it will not matter how calm you are, because 1,000 pounds of frightened animal does not check the references of the man it runs down. I stepped off my post. 10 years I had held that gate, and I had never once left it. And I left it now in a single stride, sideways and forward, out from the gate's edge into the mouth of the causeway, into the open lane between the rail and the gate, into the only place from which a man could meet the horse before the horse met the crowd. I dropped the parade rifle, let it go, let it ring on the cobbles, a thing I had carried as if it were welded to me and discarded in an instant because it was useless, and a useless thing in your hands is a danger. And I brought both my hands up, open, low, wide, and I turned my body to quarter onto the gray the way Coyle taught me on a wet field 20 years gone, and I made the sound, the low sound, not a shout. A shout is the band, a shout is the crowd, a shout is everything that had already frightened him. The low sound, the long steady note down at the bottom of the chest that a horseman makes, the sound that means nothing in words and everything in the body, the sound that says I am here and I am not afraid and you may stop now. I do not know if the crowd heard me make it. I have watched the films of that morning, all the films, the famous man's and the stranger's and the official one, and you cannot hear it on any of them over the roar. But the horse heard it. The horse heard it the way a man falling in the dark hears a voice and turns toward it before he knows he has. And in the last 3 strides before he would have hit the rail and the people behind it, the young gray saw me. He saw a still man with open hands where there had been, in every other direction, nothing but noise and fear. And the terror in him broke against the stillness the way the famous man's mockery had broken against it an hour before. And for the same reason, because stillness held long enough and meant deeply enough is the strongest thing there is. He did not stop dead. You cannot stop a horse dead. And a man who tries is a man who gets killed, but he checked. He threw his head up and his weight back and he checked, half a stride, a stagger, his great body slewing. And in that half stride I was at his shoulder, and my hand was on the cheek piece of his bridle, not snatching, never snatching, but laid there firm and traveling with him, going where he went and asking, with every ounce I had, for 1 degree, just 1 degree of turn. He gave me the degree, then he gave me another. I went with him down the lane of the causeway, running at his shoulder, my hand on his bridle and my voice still going at the bottom of my chest. And I turned him, not stopped, turned, took his straight line at the crowd and bent it, a long curving arc away from the rail and down the open center of the causeway where the procession route lay empty, and the 2 horses that had broken after him followed him the way young horses follow, away from the people and down the open road. Because the leader had at last been given somewhere to go that was not into the dark. I will not pretend I did it gracefully. I have seen the film, and I look like a man being half dragged down a road by an animal 8 times his weight, which is exactly what I was. I lost the bearskin somewhere in the first strides. My tunic tore at the shoulder. My fine white gloves were filthy, and one of them was bloodied across the palm where the cheek piece had bitten in, though I did not feel it then and felt it a good deal later. There was nothing of the cinema in it. There was no slow motion, and no swelling music, and no clean victorious stillness at the end. There was a sweating, swearing, undignified scramble down 60 yards of cobble with a terrified 4-year-old. And at the end of it, the gray came down off his terror by degrees the way they always do. The gallop falling to a canter, the canter to a broken trot, the trot to a blowing, trembling, head-down walk. And I walked beside him with my hand on his neck and the low sound still going, until a corporal of horse on a steady old bay came up alongside, white-faced and breathless, and got a hand to the rein, and it was over. It was over and the crowd had gone utterly silent. I have stood in that square on every founding day for 10 years, and I have never heard it silent. It is the loudest day in the kingdom. But for a long moment after the horses came down to a walk, 40,000 people did not make a sound, and into that silence came the small noises you never hear on the day. A child crying somewhere, the blow of the gray's breath, the ring of a dropped bottle, the high electric whine of 100 phones still recording. And then, from one place along the rail and then from everywhere along it, the sound came up. Not a cheer. It started as something rougher than a cheer, a kind of groan of relief that turned into a roar, and the roar found its feet and became applause, and the applause became the loudest thing I have ever stood inside of. And it was, for the first time in my 10 years, entirely and only for me. I did not enjoy it. I want to be honest about that, because the films make it look as though I stood there and drank it in, and what I was actually doing was shaking. The way a man shakes when the thing is done and the body finally sends the bill, and trying to keep my feet under me, and looking back up the causeway toward the gate to see whether the people behind the rail were all right, because that was still the only question I had any room for. They were all right. That is the thing that lets me sleep. The horse had not reached the rail. No one in that crowd was hurt, not one, though it was a near thing, and a man with any sense knows how near. An old fellow near the rail had gone down in the crush when the crowd surged back, and broken nothing worse than his dignity and a pair of spectacles, and a young mother had snatched her boy up off the rail in the last second and held him so hard he howled. And howling is the best sound a frightened child can make, because it means he has the breath to make it. That was the whole butcher's bill of the morning. A pair of spectacles and a frightened boy and the torn shoulder of my coat and the cut across my palm. It could have been so much else. I have lain awake doing the arithmetic of what it could have been, and the answer is always a number I do not say out loud. Now I will tell you about the famous man, because by now you are wondering, and because what he did is the other half of the story and the half the title promises. When the squadron broke, he ran. I did not see it. My back was to him, and then my whole self was down the causeway with the gray. But there were 100 cameras on that square, and most of them, for those few seconds, were pointed at him, because he had spent the morning teaching them to point at him, and so it is all there from every angle, and it has been watched more times than I would care to count. When the first scream went up and the horses broke for the gate, the famous man, the hard-jawed commando, the man who did his own stunts, the man who had spent 20 minutes asking whether I could do the things he did, turned and ran. Not toward the danger, not to help. He ran the other way, shoving through his own people to do it, and the part that has been played and replayed until I am sick of it, the part I take no pleasure in and wish to God had not happened, is that in his running he put his hand flat on the back of his own young assistant, the girl with the tablet, and pushed her behind him, between himself and the horses, and was gone. She is the one who held still. That is a thing almost no one mentions, and I will mention it every time I am given the chance. The girl, Iris, who had spent the morning 2 steps behind him, holding her tablet to her chest and her face shut tight, when she was shoved back toward the danger by the man she worked for, did not panic. She got an old man up off the cobbles, the one who had fallen, got an arm under him and dragged him back from the rail. And then she turned and stood with her body between the rail and a knot of children who had nowhere to go. And she stood there, white as paper, until the horses had gone by down the center of the road. She is 23 years old, and she had never stood a founding day either, and she stood it better than the man whose name was on the side of the bus. I learned her name afterward, and I have not forgotten it, and I do not intend to. The famous man got perhaps 40 feet before it was over. When the silence broke and the roar came up, he understood, the way a man like that understands everything, instantly and entirely and far too late, exactly what had happened and exactly what every camera had seen. I am told I did not see it. I was 60 yards away with my hand on a shaking horse, that he stopped and turned, and tried to walk back into the square wearing the smile, and that the smile died on his face when he saw the way the people were looking at him, which was not the way they had looked at him an hour before. And then his publicist had him by the elbow, and the two large men who had never fought were around him in a wall, and they took him out a side gate and away, and that is the last I ever saw of him, which was no sight at all, only the back of a dark car going fast. I did not get to enjoy any of that either, and I am glad of it. There is a low and natural pleasure a man takes in seeing arrogance brought down, and I felt it, I will not lie, a small hot satisfaction that lasted about as long as it took me to be ashamed of it. Because the truth is that the famous man did not bring himself down. He was always down. He had simply spent his whole life in places where the floor never came up to meet him, in front of cameras that loved him and crowds that were paid, in pictures where the danger was a man with a fan. And so he had never once had to find out what he was, and he found out that morning in front of the world, and there is nothing in that to enjoy. A man should be allowed to find out what he is in private. The cruelty of the day was not what the crowd did to him. It was that he had taught them all to watch, and so they were watching when the floor came up. The aftermath was not cinematic either, and I will give it to you the way it came, because the way it came is the part that taught me something. For about a day I did not exist, and then I existed everywhere. The Stranger's films of the morning went around the world before I had finished cleaning the gray's blood off my glove, and I was, briefly and ridiculously, the most famous man in the kingdom, which is a thing I would not wish on a dog. They wanted me on programs. They wanted me to tell the story with my face arranged for it. They wanted, more than anything, for me to say something about the famous man, to land the line, to be witty about his running. And the wittier they wanted me, the quieter I got, until they decided I was either very deep or very simple and gave up, and I let them think whichever was easier for them. Here is what I would have said if I had said anything, and it is what I am saying now to you, because you have stayed for the whole of it and you have earned the plain truth at the bottom. He asked all morning why I just stood there. He was not the first and he will not be the last, and the question is not even a stupid one. It only has an answer that cannot be given in the moment a fool is asking it. I stood there because standing there was the work, and the work looked like nothing, because that is what good work in my trade looks like. Right up until the half-second it looks like everything. The whole point of standing still, the discipline, the held face, the hour of being made small by a man with a camera, the whole point of all of it is to be the man who is still standing when everything else gives way. You do not build a thing like that for the day a famous man flicks your strap. You build it, year on year, hour on dull hour, so that it will be there, finished and solid and ready, on the one morning the squadron breaks, and 3 seconds is all the time the world is going to give you. The stillness is not the opposite of the action. The stillness is the action, kept in a jar, waiting. The famous man could play a soldier because a soldier on a screen is only the half-second when something happens. He had the half-second down cold. What he had never done, what he could not even imagine, was the 10 years of standing that the half-second is made of. He thought the standing was the absence of the man. It was the man. It was all of the man, packed and pressed and held, and on founding day it came out all at once, and that is why the statue moved and the action hero ran. It was never a contest between a brave man and a coward. It was a contest between a man who had paid for his courage in advance, in a currency no camera can film, and a man who had only ever been handed it as a prop. The king came down to the gate 2 days later. I will not make a great thing of it because he would not want me to. He came without much fuss, in a plain coat with one aide, and he stood with me at the causeway gate for a few minutes in the ordinary morning with the ordinary small crowd, and he did not give a speech. He looked at the place on the cobbles where I had dropped the rifle and turned the horse, and he said that he had watched the films, all of them, and that he had watched mine last and longest. And then he said the only thing about it that has ever stayed with me. He said that a country can hire 1,000 men to stand at 1,000 gates and dress them all the same, and that not one of those coats means a single thing until the morning one of the men inside one of them steps off his post for the right reason and not a moment before. He said I had shown the whole kingdom what the coat was for, and that he was not sure the kingdom had known, and that he was not sure he had known either, and he thanked me plainly, the way one man thanks another, and then he let me get back to my post, which is the only thanks I have ever actually wanted. The young gray is well. I asked after him, naturally. He went back to the stables and was given a long, quiet autumn and brought on slowly, and by all accounts he will make a fine troop horse, braver for the fright the way a man is braver for his, once he has come out the far side and found he is still alive. I went and saw him once on a free afternoon, out of my coat and in my own old clothes, and he did not know me, of course, because to him I had been a sound and a hand in the worst 3 seconds of his short life, and now I was only a man at a stable door. I stood at his stall a while and made the low sound just to see, and his ears came around, and he blew at me through the bars, and that was enough. That was, if I am honest, more to me than the king's hand on my shoulder, though I would not say so to anyone but you. They offered me things after, a promotion off the gate, into a warm office where I would be too valuable to stand in the heat, a turn at the front of the procession the next year, a place of honor, my torn coat mended and framed. I said no to all of it, as politely as a sergeant can say no to people who are sure they are being kind, and I went back to the causeway gate, where I stand to this day, with my eyes forward and my chin level and the long middle distance over the heads of the crowd. Sometimes one of them still stops at the rail and wonders aloud whether I am real, whether I can move, whether there is anything at all behind the face. I let them wonder. I have learned that the answer is not mine to give and would not be believed if I gave it. The answer is kept in a jar. It will come out, all at once, on whatever morning it is needed and not one moment before, and on every other morning of my life it will look exactly like a man standing still and doing nothing. That is the trade. That is what the coat is for. And if you ever find yourself in a great crowd on a hot day, and you see a man at a gate so still you wonder whether he is a man at all, do not flick his strap. Stand near him. He is the one who will be standing when the rest of you run.